Most leaders wake up every morning believing they're doing the right thing. They're working hard. They're making decisions. They're chasing targets. And yet, something feels off. Teams are exhausted. Trust is fragile. And despite all the effort, the results never seem to last. And the reason isn't that these leaders are bad people. It's not because they don't care. It's because most leaders don't even know the game they're in. You see, when you don't understand the game, you start playing to survive instead of to lead. You start chasing wins instead of building strength. You prioritize speed over direction, numbers over people, and short-term applause over long-term impact. And slowly, almost invisibly, the very thing that made the organization strong begins to erode. The most dangerous part is this: the system rewards it. Quarterly results look good. Shareholders are satisfied. Headlines sound impressive. But behind the scenes, people are burning out, loyalty is fading, and fear quietly replaces trust. And leaders wonder why turnover is high, why innovation disappears, why culture feels hollow. Leadership was never meant to be about beating someone else. It was never about crossing a finish line first. Because there is no finish line. This is not a game you win. It's a game you stay in. And the moment leaders realize that, the moment they stop asking, how do we win? And start asking, how do we last? Everything begins to change. Because when you finally understand the game you're in, you stop sacrificing people for performance. You stop trading trust for speed. And you start leading in a way that allows others to rise, not just results to spike. Leadership is not about winning today, because winning today can be dangerously misleading. Many leaders are taught, directly or indirectly, that success is measured by immediate results. This quarter's numbers, this year's growth, the latest ranking, the fastest win. And on the surface, that logic makes sense. Results are visible. Results are measurable. Results are praised. But leadership was never meant to be reduced to a snapshot in time. Because the moment leadership becomes about winning today, it quietly stops being about protecting tomorrow. Short-term wins feel good. They trigger applause, bonuses, recognition, and validation. They create the illusion of progress. But when leaders obsess over today's win, they often make decisions that mortgage the future without realizing it. They cut corners, stretch people too thin, ignore warning signs, and prioritize speed over stability. None of this looks dangerous in the moment. In fact, it often looks heroic. The leader who pushes harder, demands more, and delivers fast results is celebrated, until the cost arrives later when no one connects it back to the original decision. Staying in the game tomorrow requires a completely different mindset. It requires leaders to think beyond the immediate outcome and ask harder, quieter questions. Not, did we hit the target? But, are we stronger than we were before? Not, did we beat the competition? But, are our people still willing to show up with trust and energy? Because organizations don't fail suddenly. They weaken slowly. They erode through small decisions made in the name of winning now. When leaders focus only on today, people become resources instead of human beings. Energy becomes something to extract rather than protect. Loyalty becomes conditional. Over time, teams stop feeling safe enough to speak honestly, to challenge bad ideas, or to take meaningful risks. Innovation dries up not because people lack talent, but because they lack trust. And once trust is gone, no amount of short-term success can bring it back easily. Leadership that aims to stay in the game understands that results are an outcome, not the objective. The real objective is capacity. Capacity of people to keep going. Capacity of teams to adapt. Capacity of culture to withstand pressure without breaking. Leaders who think long-term know that every decision sends a signal. It tells people what really matters. And when leaders consistently choose short-term wins over long-term health, the signal is clear. You are expendable, results are not. Staying in the game tomorrow also requires patience, which is uncomfortable in a world addicted to speed. Patience doesn't mean complacency. It means resisting the temptation to sacrifice fundamentals for fast victories. It means investing in people even when the return isn't immediate. It means choosing consistency over intensity, because intensity burns out, while consistency builds endurance. The irony is that leaders who focus on staying in the game often outperform those chasing quick wins, but only over time. Their organizations may not always look flashy. Their growth may seem slower, but is stronger. It is sustainable. And when challenges come, and they always do, these organizations don't collapse under pressure. They adapt. They endure, because they were built with the future in mind, not just the next report. Leadership is an infinite responsibility. It doesn't end when targets are met or when applause fades. It continues in how people feel when things are hard, how teams behave when no one is watching, and whether the organization can still stand years after the current leader is gone. Winning today might satisfy the ego, but staying in the game tomorrow is what defines real leadership. Many leaders fall into a quiet trap without ever realizing it. They begin to believe that if something looks like a win, it must be a success. Revenue goes up, market share improves, deadlines are met. On paper, everything appears healthy. But short-term victories can be deceptive because they often hide the true condition of the system beneath them. What looks like progress in the moment can actually be the early stages of decline when the long-term consequences are ignored. Short-term victories reward immediacy. They are designed to satisfy the present, not protect the future. And when leaders become conditioned to chase these victories, they start optimizing for speed instead of sustainability. Decisions are made quickly, pressure is increased, and expectations rise without equal investment in support or development. The result may be a surge in performance, but it is usually fueled by stress, fear, or overextension rather than genuine strength. This kind of success cannot be repeated indefinitely. One of the most dangerous aspects of short-term wins is that they teach leaders the wrong lessons. When aggressive tactics produce immediate results, leaders assume the tactics are sound. They don't see the unseen costs because those costs are delayed. Burnout doesn't show up in the quarterly report. Erosion of trust doesn't appear in revenue charts. Fear doesn't show up as a line item. But all of these are quietly accumulating beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when performance can no longer be sustained. Short-term success often depends on borrowing from the future. Leaders pull forward energy, creativity, and goodwill that should have been spread over time. People work longer hours, sacrifice personal well-being, and push beyond healthy limits to deliver the win. At first, they may even feel proud. But when this becomes a pattern rather than an exception, exhaustion replaces pride. Commitment turns into compliance. And once people shift from believing in the mission to simply surviving the workload, the quality of performance inevitably drops. Another reason short-term victories are mistaken for long-term success is that they are visible and easy to celebrate. Leaders are praised publicly. Numbers are shared widely. Stories are told about how challenges were overcome. But the damage caused by these victories is private and gradual. It shows up in quiet resignations, disengaged meetings, reduced creativity, and a culture where people stop caring deeply because caring has become too costly. By the time leadership notices, the organization has already lost something critical that cannot be replaced quickly. True long-term success is not defined by how fast an organization can grow, but by how well it can endure change without losing its soul. Leaders who understand this resist the temptation to treat every moment like an emergency. They understand that consistency matters more than spikes, and trust matters more than trophies. They're willing to accept slower progress if it means building something that won't collapse under pressure. When leaders stop confusing short-term victories with long-term success, they begin to ask different questions. Instead of asking how much they can get out of people, they ask how much they can give to help people grow. Instead of asking what will impress today, they ask what will still matter years from now. These questions change behavior. They slow decision-making just enough to consider consequences. They encourage investment in relationships, learning, and systems that support people for the long haul. Organizations led with this mindset may not always dominate headlines, but they create environments where people choose to stay, to contribute, and to care. Over time, this commitment compounds into resilience. And resilience, not rapid wins, is what allows an organization to survive beyond moments of success and failure alike. When a leader believes the game can be finished, the focus naturally shifts toward beating others rather than improving oneself. Competitors become enemies instead of benchmarks. Decisions become reactive instead of intentional. The goal turns into being number one rather than being strong enough to endure. This mindset encourages comparison, fear, and urgency, all of which distort judgment. Leaders start making choices based on what others are doing instead of what their own organization truly needs. The idea that leadership has a finish line creates pressure to maximize outcomes within a limited time frame. Leaders feel compelled to extract as much value as possible before the game ends, whether that means accelerating growth, cutting costs aggressively, or pushing people beyond healthy limits. The assumption is that sacrifices made today can be justified because there will be a moment of rest later. But in leadership, that moment never comes. The consequences of those sacrifices don't disappear when a leader moves on. They remain embedded in the culture, the systems, and the people who stay. Understanding that the game is not designed to be finished changes everything. It shifts leadership away from urgency and toward responsibility. The question is no longer how to win, but how to continue. Not how to dominate, but how to remain relevant. This requires leaders to think beyond their own tenure and consider the organization as something they're temporarily responsible for, not something they own. Their role becomes that of a steward rather than a conqueror. When leaders accept that the game continues indefinitely, they stop viewing setbacks as failures and start seeing them as part of the journey. Losses are no longer proof of incompetence, but information. Challenges are not threats to status, but opportunities to learn. This mindset creates psychological safety because people are no longer punished for not winning every time. Instead, they are encouraged to adapt, improve, and grow. Over time, this builds organizations that are more resilient and less reactive. The belief in a finite game also encourages short-lived strategies. Leaders chase trends, copy competitors, and pivot constantly in search of the next advantage. But when the game is infinite, consistency becomes a competitive advantage. Values matter more than tactics. Purpose matters more than position. Leaders invest in clarity of direction rather than quick maneuvers, knowing that while strategies may change, the underlying cause must remain stable. Perhaps the most profound shift comes in how leaders treat people. In a finite mindset, people are tools to help secure a win. In an infinite mindset, people are the reason the organization exists and the means by which it survives. Leaders become more protective of trust, more patient with development, and more thoughtful about the long-term impact of their decisions. They understand that the health of the organization tomorrow depends on how people feel today. When leaders finally let go of the idea that leadership is about crossing a finish line, they free themselves from the anxiety of comparison and the exhaustion of constant urgency. They begin to lead with humility, curiosity, and courage. And in doing so, they create organizations that do not merely compete for a moment, but continue to contribute, evolve, and matter long after any single leader is gone. When leaders fail to understand the game they are playing, the cost is rarely paid by them first. It is paid by the people around them. Decisions made in confusion or fear ripple outward, shaping culture, behavior, and morale in ways that are often invisible at the top. Leaders may see numbers moving in the right direction, but the human cost remains hidden until it becomes impossible to ignore. And by then, the damage is usually deep. When the game is misunderstood, people become expendable. They're treated as assets to be optimized rather than human beings to be protected. Workloads increase without regard for sustainability. Expectations rise without clarity. Mistakes are punished instead of examined. Over time, people learn that their value is conditional, tied only to output and compliance. This creates a culture where self-preservation replaces collaboration and silence replaces honesty. Fear becomes the operating system. Not loud, obvious fear, but quiet fear. Fear of speaking up. Fear of challenging a flawed decision. Fear of being seen as replaceable. Leaders who don't understand the game often believe pressure drives performance, so they apply more of it when results slip. But pressure without trust doesn't create excellence. It creates anxiety. And anxious teams don't think clearly, don't innovate, and don't care deeply. They simply try to survive. When people become the cost, loyalty erodes. Employees may stay physically, but they leave emotionally. They stop offering ideas. They stop going the extra mile. They stop feeling proud of where they work. From the outside, everything may still function. Meetings happen. Emails are sent. Tasks are completed. But the soul of the organization begins to drain away quietly, one disengaged person at a time. The tragedy is that most leaders don't intend this outcome. They often believe they are being strong, decisive, or realistic. They justify their choices as necessary for growth or competitiveness. But leadership divorced from understanding becomes dangerous. Without clarity about the nature of the game, leaders confuse toughness with courage and control with leadership. They forget that authority gives them power over people, but leadership gives them responsibility for people. When leaders truly understand the game, they recognize that people are not a cost to be managed, but a capacity to be built. They understand that trust is not a soft concept, but a measurable force that determines whether people will take risks, speak honestly, and stay committed during hard times. They realize that every decision either deposits into or withdraws from the trust account, and once that account is empty, no strategy can compensate for it. Organizations that protect people outperform those that exploit them, but not always immediately. The advantage shows up in resilience, in how teams respond to setbacks, in how quickly they adapt to change, in how willing people are to sacrifice for the organization because they believe the organization will also protect them. This kind of performance cannot be demanded. It can only be earned. When leaders finally see that misunderstanding the game turns people into casualties, their priorities shift. They begin to measure success not only by outcomes, but by the condition of the people producing those outcomes. They slow down to listen. They create environments where it is safe to be honest and human. And in doing so, they replace fear with trust, compliance with commitment, and exhaustion with meaning. True leadership demands a kind of courage that goes against modern instincts. It asks leaders to resist the pull of immediacy, the seduction of applause, and the comfort of clear metrics. Thinking beyond numbers, quarters, and recognition requires standing firm when the pressure to conform is strongest. It means being willing to look wrong in the short term in order to do what is right in the long term. And that is not a popular choice in systems designed to reward speed and visibility. Numbers are important, but they are not the whole truth. They tell us what has already happened, not what is about to happen. They reflect outcomes, not causes. Leaders who rely solely on metrics begin to manage symbols of success instead of the conditions that create success. They chase performance indicators while ignoring morale, trust, and belief because those elements cannot be easily measured. Yet those invisible factors are often the most accurate predictors of whether performance will last. Courageous leaders understand that quarters are arbitrary time frames imposed by systems, not by reality. People do not grow in quarters. Trust does not rebuild on a schedule. Culture does not shift because a new report is issued. Leaders who tie their identity to short reporting cycles begin to distort their decisions to fit artificial deadlines. They rush initiatives that need patience and abandon efforts that have not yet had time to take root. Over time, this creates instability and fatigue rather than momentum. Recognition and applause can also quietly corrupt leadership. When leaders begin to lead for approval, their decisions lose integrity. They prioritize what will be praised instead of what will be sustainable. They say yes when they should say no. They announce bold moves before the organization is ready to support them. The pursuit of admiration slowly replaces the pursuit of responsibility. And while recognition feels good in the moment, it often pulls leaders away from the quieter work that truly matters. Leading beyond numbers requires a willingness to sit with uncertainty. Long-term thinking rarely provides immediate reassurance. It forces leaders to trust principles rather than proof and values rather than validation. This is uncomfortable, especially in environments that demand constant justification. But leadership is not about certainty, it is about direction. Courageous leaders choose a direction rooted in purpose and values, even when the outcome cannot be guaranteed. This kind of courage also shows up in restraint, knowing when not to act, knowing when growth would compromise culture, knowing when a win would cost too much in trust. Restraint is often mistaken for weakness, but it is one of the hardest forms of leadership. It requires the strength to endure criticism and the discipline to protect what cannot be quickly rebuilt. When leaders think beyond numbers and applause, they create space for meaning. People begin to understand not just what they are doing, but why it matters. Work becomes more than a transaction. It becomes a contribution. And when people feel connected to a cause greater than short-term results, they bring energy that cannot be forced or faked. Courageous leadership leaves a legacy that outlasts any single report or recognition. It shows up in organizations that continue to thrive after leadership changes, in people who grow into leaders themselves, and in cultures that remain intact under pressure. This is the kind of leadership that chooses endurance over excitement, responsibility over recognition, and purpose over praise.